Well, good evening, everyone, and welcome to this evening's webinar on growing wealth in your 30s, securing your foundation with me, Kirsty Healey. So tonight is the first in a series of webinars dedicated to understanding how we grow wealth over time at different stages of our lives. Next week, we'll be concentrating on wealth building in your 40s. So if you're sort of leaning towards the late 30s end of your age, then perhaps you might want to tune into that one as well. Or maybe you're slightly ahead of your time. So that might have some good nuggets in there for you as well. So you have one massive advantage that the older crew do not have, and that is the advantage of time. Why is that a massive advantage? Well, essentially financial planning works on the premise that we want as much time as possible so we don't have to take as much risk over time, and therefore it doesn't impede on our current lifestyle for us to save towards things like our retirement, paying down our mortgage, the next big holiday, etc. Look, we're all unique. We all have different priorities. However, the principles of wealth creation are generally the same. Spend less than you earn, pay down debt faster, invest strategically, and teach your kids how to do the same thing. So what's top of mind for you in your 30s? Do you want to get onto the property ladder? Does this feel within reach for you? Or do you have a mortgage and you're wondering how not to have a mortgage? Perhaps you have lofty dreams and ambitions to work less and play more. How do you invest to get the most bang for your buck? You've got me and my team for 45 minutes-ish tonight, so let's get stuck in. So what we're going to cover tonight is the money behaviours and mindset that will help you get ahead. And these are basically the same across ages and stages. We're going to talk, though, specifically about actions to take into your 30s to secure your financial future. And we're going to talk about getting your first property right, if that's what you choose to do. And I guess there is a premise here that we will look at property at some stage as part of our journey, but perhaps it's not the traditional method that, your mum and dad or your family first went into when it came to property. And then very excitedly, we're going to have a panel Q&A with myself and with Carla Burns moderating from the Enable Me side. And we're going to have on board AdviceFirst financial advisor, Leonardo. So that's going to be super great. We've got a bunch of questions already that's come in from you. So we're looking forward to going through that. So just a bit of a disclaimer. I don't know you and your unique situation, but I would really love to. If you'd like specific advice on your financial situation, we'll have an extra special offer at the end of today's presentation, so hang on in there till the end. However, all the information that we're providing tonight is general in nature. So who am I and what do I do? I'm an authorised financial advisor and a strategist. I work for Enable Me. However, I did have a life before that. I've got 25 odd years in banking and lending. I am also a property investor and I've been doing that for over 20 years. I also dabble in the property development space and have a business around that. And I have a wee degree in economics, but please do not hold that against me. So look, you can tell if you do the maths there, I'm clearly not in my 30s. But in my 20s and 30s, I lent into and had this great passion for leverage and for property investment. And my strategy really was buy and hold, add value, cash flow neutral properties, recycle up the equity. And what I really sought was the gap or the value add in terms of that property strategy. In my 40s, I've transitioned into a bit more development and also into new build to just bring down that cost of my repairs and maintenance. I'm now edging on a number starting with a 5, and I'm now looking into other property like commercial property, plus also intermingling that with some managed funds. But I'm interested in learning a bit more about you. So what we're going to do next is we are going to do a poll, and the poll is, what is your main financial focus right now? Is it building a solid financial foundation? Are you saving for a first home deposit? Perhaps you already have that mortgage and you're looking at repaying your mortgage faster. Or are you already in that space where you're wanting to grow wealth with property and investments? You're getting really strategic. Now, if you're in that getting retirement ready part, I applaud you. And perhaps you don't quite need us, but if you could just choose one of those, and we'll just wait for that poll to come up in terms of the results. So we have got quite the mixture here. So actually 36% growing wealth with property and investments. We have got basically a tie between building a solid financial foundation and repaying my mortgage faster at 24 and 27%. And only 6% of you saving for a first home deposit, and 6% of you getting retirement ready. So perhaps you also have a little bit of a longer line of sight in terms of that. So actually a lot of you are sitting in that space of growing wealth with property investment. So I think this is going to be really great for you, having Leon talk to us about that more towards the end. Okay, so in terms of wealth, to me, wealth isn't about luxury. It's not just for rich people with large incomes. Wealth is for everyone. It's all about really giving you choice and options and flexibility. And those options could relate to having more stability. And we've obviously all been through COVID. We understand what it means to feel really uncertain and not to know what's going to happen next. And so in that case, you know, having a buffer, having some security through that does give us some comfort, particularly in an environment where we've had low interest rates skyrocket up to high interest rates. Having that buffer is super helpful. Also with our career path, you know, do you want to switch up your career, but actually you're living paycheck to paycheck, and so you don't have the ability to be able to take that option, you know, to be able to study in order to move your career. And of course, following your passions, you know, having more time to put more life back into your lifestyle. That 4 weeks leave sometimes isn't quite enough, is it? So can we afford to take leave without pay? Do we have some money on backstop that can cover that gap for us? Choice of where to live. We're going to go into this a little bit more when it comes to, do you actually, you know, can you afford to buy where you want to live? And what are some options we can look at if you can't? And then obviously supporting your goals at every stage, even if you change your mind, you know, what your goals are today might not be your goals tomorrow or next year. So these statistics are a little bit sobering. This is how other people are feeling about money. And I know you've come here tonight to figure out sort of where you sit in terms of what you should be doing. But this is actually the reality of most New Zealanders. 80% of us feel being stressed about money negatively impacts their work productivity, which is a massive number. 55% of us worry about money daily or weekly, youch. And 70% of Kiwis expect that they need to work past retirement age. You know, are you stressed because you're a whisker away from the house of cards falling down? It's not a very great feeling. And what really sits behind that fear? Is it just not having enough? Is it that you've got consumer debt? Maybe you have job insecurity. That's quite a common theme at the moment. Perhaps you have real uncertainty about the future, and that, you know, is not helping, not having that backstop, that rainy day fund. I'm a massive fan of leaning into that fear to disempower its hold over you and put yourself back in the driver's seat. Because I'm assuming you're here tonight because you don't want to be a part of those statistics. If you want to be different, you need to take different actions than everyone else. And look, I completely acknowledge there is so much content out there at the moment. We're in a time when content is so accessible to us. But what I tend to find is that people have almost like a cognitive overload. There's so much content. And because of that, it leads to analysis paralysis, where we're so overwhelmed, we don't know what to do. We can't cut through the noise to make a decision. It's really overwhelming, and therefore we don't end up taking that action. So I think a big message takeaway tonight is just get off the starting blocks, and that can be the hardest process because we don't know what we don't know. And in the absence of that, we keep doing what we've always done. And to me, also a really good sign that you need some solid advice on board to help you take those first steps. So what do money fundamentals involve? First and foremost, what are your natural inclinations when it comes to money? What is your relationship with money? And also, what is the story that you're telling yourself? The things that you learnt growing up, which typically are the lessons that you learnt from your family, from your mum and dad, how was their relationship with money? Because quite often that can then form a narrative and also a story, and then also your beliefs in terms of what you can and can't do and what you can achieve in terms of money success. Embedding good financial habits. We all know the story. You need to do something 21 times before you really embed it. And that progress is going to build confidence. So we want to make this just as easy as we possibly can. We're human. We're busy. We want to automate everything. We want to make it as convenient as we can. Debt repayment, that's one thing that's going to hold us back, and also potentially hold us back from opportunities that we could seize later on down the track. It could affect the amount that you can borrow in terms of a pre-approval. It obviously can affect how quickly you can pay down your mortgage. We talked about a buffer. We at Enable Me think that having 3 to 6 months of your expenses put aside is a good amount. But if you don't have that, just start somewhere and then build to that amount. That will be a consistent theme that continues to come up throughout the webinar. Once you've got all those assets, how about ensuring and protecting them as well? And not just the things and the stuff, but absolutely your ability to earn income, which when you think about it as one of your greatest assets, the median income at the moment for a single person is just over 71,000 per year. The average work life is about 44 years. That's 3.1 million in a lifetime, assuming that you continue to earn a consistent amount. So definitely worthwhile protecting it. And then, of course, KiwiSaver, which Leon's going to talk more to in the Q&A section. Over 41% of us are in our default fund, and we haven't changed it. We haven't reviewed it. Probably life has moved on as well. So that's one thing that we're going to go into a little bit further. Your money mindset absolutely plays into how much success you have, your relationship with money, and also the type of plan that we want to put in place that works for you, because we want to unlock your full capability and potential. So if we just go through this quickly, shopper, saver, self-explanatory. I'm a shopper, which might seem contrary given that I'm a financial advisor. Shoppers find it much easier to spend than to save, and we like big lofty goals. The saver, on the other hand, finds it much easier to save money, watch balances increase, and to also decrease debt. Quite often is a little conservative in nature as well. Plotter sits sort of in between the shopper and the saver, neither here nor there. It's also good to understand our starting position, because it doesn't matter what's happened in the past. It's essentially, where are we starting from? If we're sinking, then we've got that consumer debt on board. We're going backwards, perhaps. We're seeing more going out the door than coming in. We need to fix that first and course correct. If we're floating, we're kind of like drifting away and not really achieving much, but we're covering our costs, and maybe we've got some KiwiSaver, but we're not being strategic. And then flying, as a bit of a measure, you could say if you're saving 20% of your income, that you're probably in a position really well to get strategic in terms of your wealth creation strategy. So look, today's all about setting yourself up for success. It's all about understanding you, what your starting point is, how much you need, how long have you got until you need to achieve that goal, and what your risk tolerance is. Know yourself. And I'll put my hand up and say, hello, I'm Kirsty. I'm a shopper. I find saving very boring. I like risk and exciting projects. In my 30s, I had a partner, no kids, and we were both terrible with money. But what we were really good at was making money and also taking risk. So you need to know where you're going in order to get ahead and to know how you're tracking. And what is that based on? So we say that it's all about the actions. Earning more doesn't necessarily translate into more progress. If you're pressuring away your surplus or discretionary income on things that don't make you any happier, then that's not going to help you to get ahead financially. In terms of that split, 80% behavior, 20% strategy, essentially I could tell you exactly what to do, but if you weren't taking some actions, obviously it's not going to get you anywhere. We estimate for our clients and for most people that we're frittering away about 15% of their income. And that could be, look, typically it's in the food and alcohol space and fuel where most people go over on. It's the high frequency expenditure, the extra trips to the supermarket for the milk and the bread, etc. But also it's things that are coming out on quite a regular basis, and they could be either subscriptions or they could be premiums for your insurance, they could be your rates bills, etc. Quite often those monthly or less, so less than a year, they're coming out either weekly or fortnightly or monthly. You're paying an additional margin for the convenience of having those frequencies, and they can add into that 15%. Have you checked recently on what you're paying for your power, what you're paying for your utilities? And obviously the big one that we're going to go into is interest payments. How much you're spending on interest, because most people think that it's actually negotiating the interest rate that gets them ahead and makes the most difference. Actually, it's your mortgage structure. So the big thing that Kiwis do is that we buy property. And owning a home is kind of what we talk about and what we aspire to. It's one of the steps that we take as we progress. However, the age for first home buyers is now 36 years old. So it's actually moved quite significantly. And if we don't get that right at the start, then it can set us back because it's quite a large commitment that's also, has high costs of entry as well as exit, and can be illiquid as well. So being prepared in terms of that first commitment, important. So if you're then getting into a mortgage at 30 and you've got a 30-year mortgage and you're paying off at 60, it doesn't leave you a whole heck of time in order to really save for retirement. And it also means that at the level of interest rates that we're at the moment, you'll repay twice the amount that you originally took out in lending. So the average mortgage these days is about 550,000. You'll pay back 1.1 million. We want to get out of that cycle if possible. So keep in mind, lead with your brain, not your emotions. A little bit hard when you're buying your first home, perhaps. That first home, though, just think of it as taking the first step up onto the first rung. It does not have to be your forever home. It's all about getting onto that ladder as a priority. And there are other ways to get onto the ladder, which we are going to go into a little bit later on. So we love to help people pay down their mortgages really quickly, and we like to get people paid down within 7 to 10 years if possible. Why is that? We want our clients to get mortgage free before hitting retirement. So there's a reasonable amount of time to save. And we typically think that period should be about 10 years. That's not a rule, it's more of a rule of thumb than anything else. We want, obviously, for our clients to pay less interest. And if you pay it off quicker, that's going to happen. And why do we want to do that? Because we want to uncover some opportunities to be able to leverage into the equity that's sitting within your home to give you the choice to invest into property should you want to. And the difference is really stark. On a $550,000 mortgage, you'll pay over a 30-year term nearly $511,000 in interest. If you were to pay it down in 15 years, $231,000 odd, and then 10 years, if you were able to do that, you'd only pay $149,000. So potential savings of $362,000. So that's where I say having the right mortgage structure can really save you thousands, hundreds of thousands of dollars potentially. So this is kind of a traditional model in terms of what age and stage looks like over time with regard to finance. So we're saying here that in your 20s, you're starting out, you're working on your career, you're trying to increase your career capital where possible. And that leads into maybe some pay rises, looking at pulling together some savings and some investments, maybe a deposit for a property, building up your assets. Into your 40s and 50s, you've solidified that, and we perhaps might have a bit of equity sitting in there, and then we're starting to get really strategic about that wealth creation piece. And then once we hit that magical 60s number, we start to really think about pulling back slightly, and maybe we're going to part-time. Maybe we are changing career and doing something not quite as stressful. And once we hit retirement, we're looking at how do we decumulate the assets that we've built up over time. We are going to talk a bit more about managed funds, but essentially managed funds in terms of their benefits compared to property are that it's far more liquid, obviously diversified. There's lots of options, there's lots of providers, there's lots of choice. You can invest in a variety of different types of funds, single sector. You can invest in something that has clean energy. So many options out there, and you can obviously choose between the risk appetite from conservative right through to aggressive, depending on what your risk appetite is. And it's also can be managed on your behalf, or it can be quite passively managed. The drawbacks to managed funds is that they can have high fees. It can be overwhelming to decide what to do. And obviously there's ups and downs, right? And managed funds are what we would consider to be a longer term option in terms of investing. So the managed fund that we're most familiar with is KiwiSaver. And the interesting thing about this is that most people haven't moved from their default provider. 341,000 of us have not, which leads me to think, obviously, we haven't looked at it in terms of how that KiwiSaver is performing. Have we compared it against the market? And there's a couple of times that you can generally withdraw from KiwiSaver. One is for that first home deposit, and the other one is at retirement. So it is generally the longest play that you're ever going to make in terms of investments. So it will pay absolutely to get this right and be super active in terms of, not just choosing a great provider, looking at the fund type, but then continuing to review it. And we do have the ability also for you to have a complimentary KiwiSaver review and get some advice that's tailored to your situation. So we'll be able to provide you a link to be able to do that. So look, how do you evaluate the best approach for you? Really important that your financial plan is fit for purpose for you. It needs to take into account all of these things. How long do you have? What are your goals? Because they won't be the same as your next door neighbor or your brother or your sister. What is your natural risk appetite? What are you comfortable with? How's your cash flow? What can we fund? Can we get finance? Can we get finance to be able to assist us to either get into our own home or to fund an investment property? Do we have enough equity within our home that we can, that's sitting there doing nothing, that we can then leverage in order to invest further? And for you, what are your wealth goals? What's super important to you? So we're going to discuss this in a little bit of detail. I am going to bring in my team here. We have got Carla Burns, who's going to be facilitating our discussion, myself, and then Leonardo, a financial advisor at AdviceFirst. So I am going to bring them in to say hello to you. I'm just going to exit out of here.
Kirsty.
Hello, welcome.
Hello. So thank you for everyone who's taken the time to join us today. We have had some really great questions come through, and I think one of the advantages that we really have at Enable Me is our ability to do a whole lot of work in this space and give some great advice around kind of financial strategy and coaching, but also we work really closely, obviously, with the team at AdviceFirst to actually do a lot of that strategic advice and execution. And so across the entire team, we have a wealth of expertise to talk to a variety of different kind of wealth creation strategies. And so today, what we thought would be really interesting is to obviously answer some of your questions. And as Kirsty said, she has a real wealth of passion and experience in the property space. And Leon, obviously, as a wealth advisor, has a significant amount of experience around KiwiSaver and also what to do with managed funds investing. And so we asked for any of your questions to come through. There may be some additional ones that come through, but I've got a really good selection here to get us started with. And I think what's really interesting is that loads of people joining us here tonight are really asking that question around how you kind of blend all of these different strategies and what to use in each situation. So we're going to answer some of your questions now. I'm just going to remind you that, of course, every situation is going to be completely unique because, once again, financial advice is highly personal. So we're just giving generic advice here, and we are going to have a chat with you at the end, but we would welcome helping you in any capacity, whether it's to talk about your KiwiSaver, your wealth, or just your general overall strategy at the end. So we'll come back to that at the end. But one of the first things that was kind of asked is, if you're sort of thinking about that first home ownership piece, and you're starting to think about how to prepare to get onto the property ladder, because as we said, a lot of people, 36 is where you're starting to get on to that property ladder. KiwiSaver is obviously a vehicle that you've been using to potentially save up for your first home deposit. Now, both of you have probably got some pieces that you can kind of contribute into this conversation. So first of all, I'm just going to introduce Leon into the conversation. What are some of the things specifically when you're thinking about entering that first home purchasing market that you should be thinking about your KiwiSaver? Because your strategy probably changes with your KiwiSaver over that period of time. Because at 36, hopefully you've been in your KiwiSaver for a good 16 years.
Yeah, so typically the closer you are to using your KiwiSaver, the more conservative you want to be. You want to avoid a little bit of the volatility. So for classic example, earlier this year, say at the beginning of the year, you were looking into property, trying to buy something, and you found something that's settling in April when you may have heard that while it was doing well in January, the markets have dipped quite a bit in March and April, so that volatility would impact how much your deposit could be. So we want to minimize that and mitigate that risk. So that's one of the things that you can consider. The closer you are to actually using it, the more you should consider moving it to something less volatile, like a conservative fund.
And so that's where it's really worth having that conversation with an advisor as you're approaching that kind of pivotal point of moving into actually kind of doing that first home acquisition, to just make sure that you've got it in the right fund and not moving it
Correct.
too early, but leaving it too late. So Kirsty, in terms of the more coaching side, the other thing as you move into first home ownership, we talked a little bit about emergency buffers and things like that. But as you go through the lending process, obviously, you talked about being a shopper. The bank starts to scrutinise what you're doing with your money quite extensively. So what are some of the tips and tricks there?
Yeah, absolutely. So a big part of turning up and looking great in terms of your application is being bank ready. So we all know that finance has been harder to get. And what the bank is doing is looking through and looking for those recurring costs and taking those and stacking them up and going, well, that's actually part of your expenditure. So having a bit of a tidy up 3 months away from when you submit that application is a really great idea in terms of cleaning up house and getting rid of that additional fritter that we talked about. You might also want to ensure that going into it that you've already got a bit of a buffer saved up in terms
Yep.
of those unexpected costs that come up. And you might even want to just have a little practice in terms of that additional money that you're going to need to pay for the commitment of the mortgage repayments. Just practice putting that aside, right? And get really used to not having that money just to see
Yep.
if you can do it.
That's really good. Yeah. I think we will have seen the trend where a lot of people ran their numbers in that low interest rate market very close to the wire, and any incremental changes then starts to make that very challenging place to live.
Yeah, absolutely. And look, the banks mitigate by using a test rate. They test you at a higher interest rate so that they understand that you're going to be okay if interest rates go up. But you can do that yourself in terms of calculating what that's going to be with one of the bank calculators. And
Yeah.
that again just de-risks the entire your entire commitment to that.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
also just be okay with if you can afford it, because typically what I'm finding is the bank will give you more money than actually is comfortable for you, and then your lifestyle goes out the door.
Yeah. So one of the questions that came through, which I thought was really great, is that someone said, look, I'm 36, so right on that kind of average age of owning a home, and I'm actually going to take my KiwiSaver, which is around about $100,000, and put it into my first home. So it's really exciting to buy that first home, but also what is really exciting today is we've got a lot of people on who are living the Kiwi dream of buying the first home, but we're really really happy to see at Enable Me and AdviceFirst that people are starting to think about retirement. And so then there's that concern that I've kind of taken my KiwiSaver balance back to zero. Am I going to have enough time to kind of build up a retirement fund? And so I guess, Leon, we kind of had a bit of a chat about this. And
Yes,
yeah,
yes.
I mean,
So,
yeah,
so yes, first of all, like 36, and you build up that much amount for in your KiwiSaver, that's something to applaud. But also, if we look at it now, say you've started investing in KiwiSaver at age 18 and you build that up in 36, you access your KiwiSaver for retirement at age 65 at the moment, you still have that 29-year runway with
Yeah.
with that
So
thing.
you've got like double
And
the time that you've already, like you've spent half of that
almost
time to
double.
get to 100, and now you've got double to get.
Exactly. And also the reality of it is it's very likely you're earning more now at 36 than you were at 18.
Correct.
And also, I've crunched the numbers here. Say you used as much as you can for your first home withdrawal, but it's required that you leave at least $1,000 in your KiwiSaver. Now, if you are, say, self-employed and just contributing the minimum amount of $21 per week to qualify for the maximum government contribution, so $21 per week over 29 years, that's approximately 37,700 over that 29 years. I've crunched the numbers, and after 29 years, you'll have 135,000 if we're basing it on the rate of the average growth fund. So the fascinating thing with that is out of that 135,000, 96,000 of that is from compound interest. So that's how much that runway makes a difference for you. The longer
That's
your
actually
runway
really
is good.
cool. Yeah, so like when you put it like that, even if you were to just do the bare minimum, you
Exactly.
can get up to that point just with the time. And I think what a cool way to explain the benefits of compounding interest, which is that that is just doing KiwiSaver, and that is just going to form one component of your retirement fund. So I think starting again and having that as one portion of your kind of overall wealth strategy is really, really important for your retirement. Yeah.
Yeah, the main thing is consistency, putting that away, setting it aside, and letting it grow. You don't cut off the tree while it's still growing a bud. You let it grow into something. And yeah.
So at the moment, I guess a lot of people are asking, like, in the current climate, Kirsty, and there's kind of two parts to this question, but what about investing in property, be it for your home or be it for like property investing in the current economic environment? Because I guess a lot of people get very nervous and are trying to not time the market or, have a crystal ball about, like what's going to happen. Are we going to see growth rates and all that sort of thing? Like, how do you make a decision at this current point in time if with property trading where it is at the moment, is it the right thing to invest in?
Yeah, great question. And of course, I'm an investor, so I'm going to tell you it's always a good time. The best time was 20 years ago. The next best time is today. But property investment is all about the ability to leverage, because essentially what we're saying is it accelerates our investment potential. So if we've got, say, 100,000 in cash, we're putting that into a managed fund, we might get a lovely 6% return on that. But if we were to leverage, and that is, I mean, borrowing some money from other people, i.e. the bank, say 400,000, we've now got an asset that's worth 500,000, and we're earning that return on a much higher valued asset. So with property investment, it's all about, it's like magnifying the value of your money. And it's a really great time to be doing that in your 30s, because you've got this lovely runway ahead of you to take advantage of that. And with investment, it's all about being able to buy and hold. So we need a really great strategy around that to hold it through a property cycle. We're not trying to pinpoint when to buy and when to get in, because we're holding it for long term. And then
that property cycle, is like, it's always been sort of thought of around 10 years. It could be slightly longer now. It's sort of potentially elongating a little bit, but you want to hold it for the sort of that longer period of time. So at 30-ish, you've probably got the ability to do this several times over.
Yeah, absolutely. It's all about time in the market rather than timing the market. That also goes for any type of investing. And obviously, if you're looking at a 30-year mortgage term, you've got plenty of time. The banks are not on your side. They're not favourable forever. They start rethinking at age 70. And so we want to get in well before then, and then, get on board, hold for as long as we can, And you're right to say that that property cycle is quite different dependent on the area. So in an Auckland situation, we might be 7 to 10 years. If you're looking at Wanganui, that might be more like 14 years, and they might move in slightly different fashions.
But when you look at the property trends, like I think we get really sort of stuck in looking at the granular trends over like a couple of years or a really short time frame, but it's about kind of leveling out and looking at the time frames, like even over like 20, 30, 40 years, the trend definitely shows kind of growth as opposed. It's that whole time frame thing, which is what we keep coming back to. The advantage that you young people in your 30s have is that you've got time, and it's probably the greatest asset. And that's why the banks are way more favourable in terms of supporting people to do that investing.
Absolutely. And if you are at the other end of the scale where you're heading into your 50s and 60s, that's something to be really mindful of, because essentially all it's going to do is condense down the term that will be available to you, which again starts to really impede on your lifestyle, which is what we don't want. You know, in our 30s, we want the lifestyle, we want to be doing stuff. And what Leon was talking about was those small but really consistent, incremental investment points that are going to get us ahead without impeding on that lifestyle piece.
So, Leon, just to go to the flip side of that, in terms of basically having investment funds, like we've obviously had some market volatility this year. There was a lot of people really concerned around April and with tariffs and all the rest of it, but actually the markets have done the exact opposite of what everyone was worried about in April and have been incredibly favourable. And so once again, like everyone's saying, well, what do you do with investing in the current climate? It's, how would you answer that?
We always advocate for time in the market and timing in the market. And that's why KiwiSaver is a good tool for retirement. There's checks and balances there. It's intended for retirement. It's locked till age 65. If you have a bit more self-control and you want to retire earlier, you can look at managed funds. But for most people, setting it aside and forgetting it and not being tempted to dip into it helps a lot. And you also have the bonus that you have the government contribution and employer contributions, which are actually going up by 33% in the next 2 years. Now, with regards to volatility, volatility is always going to be there. So, for example, say you're 39 years old right now, or we put it into context, we put 39 years old, 26 years back. That's 1999. And what happened after 1999? It's 2000, the dot-com bubble burst. It's and then 2001, 9/11 happened. Then we had the war in Afghanistan. And then a few more years later, we had the global financial crisis. And then a few more years later, the earthquake in Christchurch. You get the idea. We passed through COVID. In the past 5 years, we've had several. But say you invested just $1 back in 1999. That $1 would be now worth $8.23 had you just left it in the market. But obviously, if you're adding more, say you added another dollar back in 2000, that would be now $7.13 to add to what you already invested. And then say you add another $1 in 2001, that would be another $7.15. You get the idea. It keeps
it just keeps growing.
Compounding.
It just keeps growing,
So the more time you have in the market, the more you invest in it, and the more you just focus on keeping your lifestyle, the more, and focusing on setting aside more into your nest egg, into your investments, or focusing into property, and while maintaining a very balanced and maintainable lifestyle without, going into debt, and also being able to set aside stuff, then the more your wealth will be able to grow into retirement.
Which I love actually what the two of you have done is you've given two kind of alternate views of ways you could do things. And I think what it comes down to, and I'm kind of conscious of time, but I do want to just kind of cover a few more points because we've had so many questions, but it's, you've kind of covered that, like, property gives one option, wealth gives another option, but there is an option to kind of do one or the other or both, depending on what you would like to do. And all of us are doing wealth to a certain extent because we're doing something with our KiwiSaver. But in essence, if I was 30, it's a long time ago. But when someone's sitting in front of you, and I'm going to kind of throw this to both of you, how do you choose the best strategy for the person that's in front of you? Because I guess it kind of depends on what you are as a person and whether you can, like, see some of the stuff that Leon says about set and forget is very appealing to some people, and some people like like you said, Kirsty, the challenge of kind of turning something. And yeah, so Kirsty, maybe you want to start with saying, like, how do you assess what's the best strategy for those that are involved? And sometimes it might be access to cash.
Yeah, there are so many variables that come into this, but first and foremost, what are your goals? What are your visions for what you want to achieve? Because that is always going to guide what kind of strategy we're going to put in place for you. And for some people, that might not be home ownership. It might be that you're in your early 30s and you're like, I'm going to travel. So I want to get a foot on the property ladder. I want that I want the ability to invest in it, but I don't want my own home because that's just a pain in the butt. So maybe we want to live in the place that we want to, which might be, I want to live in Ponsonby, but I can't afford to buy there. So I'm going to buy a rental property, and that's what we call rent vesting.
Yeah.
So, there's so many different ways that you can look at a strategy for a person. That is one of them. What are their goals and investment that guides the entire strategy, but also what are their money personalities? What is their risk appetite like? What do they absolutely don't want to do in terms of that investing part? And also, what are the resources at hand for them? Is there serviceability? Can we get finance? Is there a deposit?
Yeah.
Or are we just starting out? Do we have that buffer that's set up already that we can rely on? And how are our habits around money and our relationship with money? Are you the type of
How
person?
disciplined?
Yeah. How much discipline do you have? Like, are you really, really great at paying down debt, but you can't save for the life of you? So we take all of those things into account. We're guided by the vision, we're guided by the goal, knowing that we are starting exactly where we are, forgetting about what we've done in the past, and building towards and getting closer to, and hopefully on trajectory, towards those goals and visions. We make some adjustments along the way. We review every year, and hopefully we get to that point where we're closer to our goals rather than further away from them.
Yeah. And Leon,
Yeah, there's a
you go. Sorry.
And it is a very personal thing. Like, some people, they do like to see the value of their investments by just logging in and looking into the app. While some people, they like to see that, oh yeah, that house is mine. I'm paying that down. There is argument too that if your personality is you're really good at paying bills, but you kind of find it a hard time setting aside some funds, then property investing might be a good or savings strategy for you. For savings vehicle, you also get the capital gains from the property. Alternatively, there would still be work involved in it if you're maintaining the property, but also that doesn't mean to say there's no work involved with managed funds. You need to file taxes, especially, or even if you're investing in stocks, you still need to file taxes, especially if they're overseas stocks too.
Yeah.
So it just depends on what you gravitate towards, what you'd like, and what your risk tolerance is.
And I think that so there's just a couple of questions I'd add on to there, which is, so a lot of people, obviously, Kirsty, are now just like, well, is it still worth property investing with potential capital gains tax coming in? But it's not. Property investing isn't always just about the gain that you're going to get on the property, because it could be about deriving a rental income. It could be about, as you said, being able to borrow more and actually have more to invest than just like when you're
Yeah.
factoring it in, you're not just relying on a capital gain to actually make the financial value in a investment
No.
property.
Absolutely. Part of that process is that we want to ensure that you can hold that property over the course of that property cycle. So
Yep.
that's where the buffer comes in. We want
Yep.
to understand if you're subsidizing that investment, can we afford that? That's really important. But just point out that there have been capital gains tax brought in several countries overseas, and that hasn't impeded that capital gain. So it has
Yeah.
been proven to still be a very successful mode of investing to still invest into property. So I would not discount that, and don't be scared by politics and the potential of politics to
No, that's great
destroy
feedback.
you. Yeah.
I think the other thing, which is a really great question as well, is that, you know, someone sort of said, look, we've recently moved to New Zealand and we're trying to put as much as possible into KiwiSaver, but should we be putting all of, and you know, they're like, we don't own a home, so we're trying to use KiwiSaver as our vehicle for saving in our 30s. But Leon, perhaps you want to touch on kind of some of the advantages of maybe splitting investment strategy rather than just putting all your eggs in the one.
Yeah, definitely. So again, it's really hard to say in general without saying what the fund offer by the employer is, but it's likely that the fund offered by employer, you may be able to access it before age 65, which can make a huge difference if you want to lower your hours after age 60 or something when you could access it. Another thing that could be beneficial is if you split it between KiwiSaver and the fund offered the employer, they may have an additional incentive there that they're matching, the employer's matching your contribution more than the minimum required by the KiwiSaver employer contribution scheme. So again, it depends on case-to-case basis. It's best to check with what the offering is with the employer and then check that too.
Yeah. So in essence, whenever you're dealing with a KiwiSaver, you want to really understand what is being offered to you, how much of your KiwiSaver is locked in firmly till you're 65, and what your employer contribution is in relation to your own contribution, because you want to be matching your employer's contribution and kind of getting the maximum flexibility for your own contribution.
Exactly. So I guess the main thing that's the easiest strategy if someone's looking for a strategy to maximize their saving is to maximize what you can get in a match for free. So if by getting that, say if your employer matches $100 for every $100 you've invested, that's essentially $100 return on your 100. Well, that's essentially 100% in return on your invested amount up to a maximum. Now and again, that's very hard to match with any investment vehicle, but that also puts more in your pocket over the long term to compound.
People kind of ask about taking KiwiSaver breaks, etc., in terms of putting into their KiwiSaver when they're on maternity leave or if they're self-employed. What's the recommendation around your contributions to your KiwiSaver if you're in those situations, Leon?
Again, this is just general recommendation. It would be different again, but if you do have allowance in your budget to at least contribute that that $21 per week or 143 per year, sorry, 1,043 per year. That way you maximize the government contribution. That's $260 odd per year. That's still $1,300. That's going to compound over 30 years. And as we could see earlier, every
dollar counts.
$1. Yeah, every dollar counts. That times 7 that over 6 years. That's still quite big.
Yeah, right? Absolutely. Well, we have obviously had so many great questions today, and I just want to thank you both. obviously it's really exciting to see so many people thinking about the vehicles they can look to grow their wealth. And it's good to see so many people thinking ahead. What we're certainly finding is that the Kiwi dream of retirement is evolving and changing for us all. And that may be through property ownership, that may be through investing. There's a different way for everyone. And so what we will do is I'll ask my colleague who's producing to just bring up the slides, which is to say, if you would like to reach out and talk to an advisor, and we've obviously spoken in quite a bit of detail today, and that was the intention to kind of talk quite technically, is that we are more than happy to book in and have you do a 90-minute consultation. The coaching consultations are really key in terms of working out what is the best course and next step of action for you. So if you want to take advantage of that offer, please get in contact with us tonight. And then after tonight, that's $100. That's a really good comprehensive session where we can work out what are the next best steps for you. For everyone, I think it's definitely worth always periodically having a check-in around what you are doing with your KiwiSaver and is it kind of performing. There are a lot of KiwiSaver providers out there, and one of the things we know with a financial journey is that if you're going to be in KiwiSaver for the long haul, which is probably for most of us 30 to 40 years, your life goals will certainly change in that period of time. So you want to be sure that your fund is doing its job for you, because Leon, if you've done one thing tonight brilliantly, it is to illustrate that $1 actually does make a difference in a 30-year compounding thing, and every dollar does definitely count. So by all means, get in contact with us. If it's not to come and see a coach about sort of that wider sort of plan, we can also have a conversation with you about just specifically KiwiSaver, or we'll put you in contact with our wealth investing team. So on behalf of everyone tonight, I want to say thank you, Kirsty. Thank you for kicking us off. And thank you very much for joining us and learning a bit more about how to kind of build your wealth and set yourselves up for the future. So thank you for letting us all run over time, and enjoy.
Thanks all.
Thanks.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night.